Oh my god, these technical features. What is this, some kind of enduro? This is the hardest XC course ever, except when you look at the actual racing. I don't think it was these features that made the race hard, and also it was won by a roadie, so how technical could it have been? And also, what am I doing back on YouTube? Hi, my name is Cosmo Catalano, and this is how the race was won, Crans Montana. So I purchased a license to use some footage from the Mountain Bike World Cup, specifically the cross-country races, in part because I could almost kind of afford it, but mostly because I think there isn't a tremendous amount of very good coverage and analysis on it. And I mean, like a lot of you, I ride my mountain bike a lot these days. But I bet some of you are wondering why it has taken me until now, until literally halfway through the season, to put something on YouTube. Well, first off, most of the things I do are on Instagram at How the Race Was Won. You can find a lot of content there, mountain biking and also road. And it turns out that the opening World Cups overlapped with, the heart of the Spring Classic season. And I was fooled into thinking that a certain notorious ramp forgetter was going to legitimately challenge Tadej Pogačar at Liège-Bastogne-Liège. It was going to be a great battle, except ramp forgetter decided to race pretty cynically. I don't know. I went into this in detail in the How the Race Was Won podcast that I do for Escape Collective. That's another thing you can listen to. I'll put a link in the bio. Anyway, we had two excellent World Cups in Brazil. That we had Nova Mesto, which was on Memorial Day in the U.S., so I was traveling with my family. And then we had Val di Sole, which was at the same weekend as my 20th college reunion. So it's been a very busy spring, and while I've had time to watch the races, I have not had time to sit in my attic and bask in the glorious glow of this Amazon LED lighting in front of this somehow 4K webcam that is half the size of my iPhone. I should probably start talking about the bike racing since we've now gone longer than any video I've made in like the past 2 years. Women's XCC, Puck Pieterse did a lot of work on the front to keep the pace high and also to maybe not descend as fast as some of the people behind her wanted to descend. Still, Anna Tauber, not going to be intimidated by that, makes the daring last lap attack. Pieterse still tracks her down, springboards off that, reels in the victory, Keller comes around, Tauber hanging on for third, at least as far as we could tell from this camera, which appears to be in Austria somewhere. Men's short track, we saw Tom Pidcock continue his long history of bad starts, but follow it up with some legitimately bad bicycle racing. Just maybe he hadn't been on the mud in a bit. I don't know. It took him a while to dial it in. He went from last to first. Not really based on anything except the pack's reluctance to make that kind of Tauber attack. They all sat there and waited for him to catch up, and what a surprise. He won the race. On that theme, let's move to the women's XCO. No surprise to see this collection of characters at the front of the event. Pieterse, cyclocross racers, good in mud. Lecomte, if you saw her last year at Mont Saint Anne, extremely good in mud. Keller, if you saw her a couple weeks ago at Bike Revolution, extremely good in mud. I was actually really surprised to see how aggressively Puck Pieterse tried to get to the front early in this race. Maybe trying to duplicate that success of bottling people up the way she did in the short track, but this is pretty long for that to work. And Lecomte came into this race with some shaky results. Maybe there was some thought that the pressure would hurt her, but no, it did not. Keller gave her a pretty good fight, but I think was, kind of losing ground throughout the race. Men's XCO, yeah, this was the Tom Pidcock tour de force. This was always going to be, even with the mud, a pretty good course for him. Lots of climbing, lots of pavement, lots of technical features that were really hard that he sort of scoffed at. And yeah, by lap 2, this thing was over. You got to give credit to the guys behind him. It actually kind of segues into one of the larger points I want to make about the weekend, is that resilience was sort of a storyline here, right? I mean, you had in second place in the men's XCO, Matthias Flukiger, who really controversially named to the Swiss Olympic team after not really having any results all year. And there were a lot of other riders, Marcel Guerini, Filippo Colombo, who had a definite claim to being one of the best male riders out there behind Nino. And the Swiss Federation sort of copped out on that, and they're like, oh, we'll just use this whole Olympic cycle, which is many, many years. And, how you race in Paris in July has nothing to do with how you raced at Mont Saint Anne last October. These were conditions that definitely favored him. He's a great rider in the mud. He definitely focused on the XCO, didn't do the short track at all, trusted in his abilities, and came through with a good result to at least say, hey, it wasn't a terrible thing to put me on the Olympic team. I think you could actually say that Nino, too, had a really strong, resilient performance. He had a really terrible series of crashes, and still managed to regroup and come back and fight for that third spot. Didn't quite get it, but a lot of people could have just DNF'd there. And I'm actually thinking specifically of Luana Lecomte in Brazil. Had two pretty forgettable performances, including one DNF at Arashah. And you got to remember, this is an Olympic year. There is an Olympics in France. Lecomte is the French national champion. She has a very good French compatriot. There's got to be a lot of tension there about who's going to be a leader, who's going to make the team. All that has got to constantly be in her head. And to go from that moment at Arashah where she's curled up in a ball on the side of the course getting a hug, to this moment in Crans-Montana where she comes down the final hill, you can see her crack that smile, you see her cross the finish line, and immediately goes over to the side of the course to get those hugs. I just like kind of the book ending of that going from a season where people are wondering what's wrong with you to just sticking it out and coming through with a big win. Mwah. Also on that resilience train, Gwendolyn Gibson had a crash, and she had been out for a couple of months with a broken collarbone. First descent of her first race back, just absolutely sends it. There's no stronger message you can give to the world that you're back and ready to play, and it's something I love to see. And you just can't have ripping down an incomprehensibly steep section of single track without incomprehensibly steep sections of single track. All throughout the run-up to this event, the big thing on social media seemed to be that this course was way too hard or was not suitable for cross-country, or people were like, oh, what is this? DH? Oh, should they race with full-face helmets? I don't really agree. Let's take it back like decades to kind of the beginning of mainstream cross-country racing. Yes, you still had your Bart Brenchens right there, basically unchanged. Everything else is different. A couple years ago, it became kind of a joke to say that gravel bikes were really just old mountain bikes, but gravel bikes are substantially better than old mountain bikes. Old mountain biking in general was pedaling up a dirt road and then trying not to endo on the way back down. And we have now disc brakes, we have through axles, we have burly stanchioned forks, we have better geometry, and we have trails that are built to be hard, to work with that sort of technology. And while it looks really spooky to see athletes climbing up around the top of a feature, like scouting it, sometimes having really spectacular crashes off of it, that is a relatively normal process. You go to a cross-country race a day or two in advance, and you'll see people walking the course. You'll see them looking at lines, scouting lines, talking to each other, trying one line, hiking back up. They generally don't have spectacular endo crashes, but at the same time, these are features that are going to test them to the limits of their ability in a race. And, I wasn't there. I can't say with absolute certainty, but nothing at this looked totally out of place from stuff that I saw at Mont Saint Anne last year, where I was actually there in person and saw, extremely good Sendy riders like Yolanda Neff kind of walking up mid-race to a lip on a feature and being like, no, I'm not in the headspace for that right now. I can't hit that. That's how hard some of these lines are. In fact, a lot of these lines are at a lot of different venues. And I think it's actually pretty critical that the sport continues to push the limits in terms of what can be done in a cross-country race on a cross-country bike and cross-country gear. Like, you look at a race like Mont Saint Anne, what it used to look like back in the 90s is not what it looks like now. And I think there are some courses. I love Nove Mesto, right? It's an institution, but it's also kind of lost a lot of its edge technically. You look at the same descents people used to ride in the early teens, and they were really pushing riders at the front of the field to their limits. They've got these spindly 100-millimeter forks with quick releases and two steep head tubes, and it's a real challenge to kind of pick your way through these rocky descents. But with a modern bike, it really is point and shoot. I mean, you had people unclipping coming off of the jumps they added to the course, landing sideways. None of that really seemed to matter. And while I wouldn't say that either of the winners was unworthy, Pidcock especially is known to be a great technical rider, I think we saw a lot of bobbles from Pauline Florent-Prévot that went basically unpunished because it was so easy for her to simply stand up and ride hard on the dirt road sections of the course. Mountain biking always has and should continue to be constantly striving to find a balance between raw technical ability and raw bike pedaling prowess. Cram Montana is a course where they've made that assessment very recently and decided to push heavily in the technical direction. And honestly, I think in less muddy conditions, as I mentioned at the top of the show, the mud was really the thing that made this race hard. But I think in drier, more normal conditions, we would have gotten a much faster, much more competitive, much more compelling spectacle. And I think maybe Nove Mesto is in a place where the pendulum has swung too far the other way. It's too much of a peddler's course. They need to find some new technical features to break that up, keep that balance, so that I have something new and interesting and fun to say the next time I talk you through how the race was won. Whew, what was that, like 11 minutes? If you've made it this far, thank you. I don't have a Kickstarter-y thing set up yet, but I do have a coffee. I guess I'll put the link to that in the bio. Let me know with a comment what kind of crap, stickers, hats, mugs, whatever you might want from a Kickstarter, and I'll see what I can do, or Patreon, or whatever the F it's called these days. Yeah, I said F. I get edgy sometimes. Also, just want to reiterate, at How the Race Was Won on Instagram is where I post most of my content. It's pretty much daily. It's more race-focused, like kind of classic How the Race Was Won. I also have the How the Race Was Won podcast. That's with Dan Cash. We go through all of the big road races in the previous week and talk about the tactics in detail with humor and insight and yada, yada, yada. You can find that at escapecollective.com or wherever fine podcasts are distributed. I don't even know. But yes, again, you made it this far. Thank you very much. Making long videos is at least as irritating as I remember.